quality education is very important. We have picked up the state education curriculum. We've used iDiscover to actually convert that curriculum into a more interesting piece. 50% of the time my children spend time out of classroom, and their learning abilities are increasing by every passing day. Last year on the board exam, for 7 months we had one child in one of my schools in Ludhiana who stood 14th in the district, and he was absolutely very poor when he came to us, and that's the difference we are making. Let me also share with you on the public-private partnership in Punjab. The Chief Minister, who's very passionate about opening up model schools, or so-called the other schools, the word he uses. And I'm very happy to share here that a Punjab Education Development Board has been set up with 7 government members chaired by the Punjab Chief Minister and 7 members from the private sector. The government is giving 10 to 15 acres of land. 50% of the capital expenditure will be spent by the government, and 70% of operational expenditure the government will provide. We as private partners will bring in 30%. But the beauty is, it will be managed by us, and there is no interference, and I'm saying it in capital and bold, from any government department. And we have also arranged that they charge cess on liquor, and that fund comes into the Punjab Education Development Board to be funded for other schools. So I think in a nutshell, I'm saying that if we really need to do something, public-private partnership is going to be something which the government must consider, because when we have teachers on our rolls, they are accountable to us. They are not accountable in the government system. Sure. When we are teaching our children through mobile trainers, mobile teachers and mobile coordinators, they are learning, and they are not only learning, they are actually going back and teaching their parents. That's the impact what we are making. I think I'll stop at
Thank you. Wonderful. Rajendra, I have 2 questions for you. Rakesh said that money does not reach where it ought to from the government funds. And India spends anywhere from 3.5 to 4% of its GDP on education. I believe Malaysia spends 8 and China spends less than us. So do we need more allocation or better utilization and accountability? And how is that possible? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I think first of all, the 6% number which government has stated, and I think seems to be heading towards that gradually, is by all calculations the minimum that we need to spend. So first of all, I think, and if you look at the next 5-year plan, we see a lot of commitment to reaching that number. So first of all, we have to put that 6% to work. Now, the reality is that even where the money is going, we find that the system is not effective. So would I say that we shouldn't spend 6%? No, I don't think we can say that. We have 1 million government schools, we have less than 0.1 million private schools. So this system, if it has to change, will take time. And I think to look back, we can now say that at least, 95% of kids do get admitted because of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. The fact that many drop out is a concern, but at least we are now dragging the kids into school. And with things like midday meal and so on, we are trying to keep them there. But the effectiveness is extremely low. So I would say that 6% has to be achieved. Then we need to do some reform. So, I mean, million things need to be done, but I'll club them in 3 categories. And I think those are, some of them point towards the kind of work that Bharti Foundation is doing. But first of all, I think there is academic reform, which means what to teach and also how to teach. Yeah. So both these subjects are kind of hard-coded into history. You can't change what to teach and you can't change how to teach. So one reform of policy has to be such that there is delegation of power as low down as possible. I will not say at which level, but right now it sits too far at the state level or at the central level. So if we make it easier for reform to happen, if we remove those constraints, some may do a little worse than, unlikely anyone do a little worse than what we're doing, but most places will move ahead. Second is how to teach. So I just heard Sunil talk about saying that kids are taken out of the class so that if they have to study nature, they study nature by touching it rather than, with someone boring, writing on the board or not writing on the board. So what to teach, how to teach. That is the first reform, which means we have too many constraints, so can we eliminate those constraints and let's see what happens. I would say even if we said that. So that is one reform. The second reform, I would say, is the administrative reform. So I heard Rakesh talk about public-private partnership, which means that who can participate and how people can participate today is extremely limited. And who can exit? You know, entry and exit are two fundamental decisions for any activity. Today, if a course is started in our country, it cannot be stopped, for example. So you can enter, but you can't exit. So the second is administrative reforms. How do we engage various players in the education system? Because a lot of people want to get involved, but there's no mechanism to get involved. So the administrative reforms is about who can get and who can get out. And I would like to make a point that it should remain the responsibility of government to look after education. However, if someone as a parent wants to send a child to a non-government school, that non-government entity should have all the freedom. Then we shouldn't say you have 50% seats and 80% seats or whatever. If you're not taking government money, then government should stay out. Right now they're not doing that either. So that government has a responsibility, let it set up the school, but if a citizen in this country doesn't want to send the child and someone else is willing to come in, let them come in. So I think this who can come in, who can get out, how you can do partnerships, that administrative reform is the second one. And third, I would say the financial or fiscal reform, by which I mean, what should a school charge? If it's a government, fully owned government school, let them charge nothing, which is fine because government pays the money. Today, the reality is, and I think Rakesh alluded to that, is that in the village, the village teacher runs a school at home where he or she charges. Doesn't go to school, but charges. And the parents are still willing to pay in that ramshackle room of the teacher's house to the teacher rather than send the child to school. So, at the same time, in the cities or in smaller towns, if there are entrepreneurial activities of children, people wanting to set up schools and give value, and people want to pay, let them pay. Don't stop that from happening, because if we can't manage our schools and government, we shouldn't play dog in the manger, right? So now these are three areas of reform, and therefore one is 6% has to be spent. Second is if we open up these, unnecessarily tightened areas. So in financial reform, for example, put the money in the hands of the parent. So Rakesh talked about the voucher idea, which is if we know that in the village school the expense per child is so many 100 rupees a year, for argument's sake, those numbers are known, or so many thousand a year, it's not a small number, then it's possible to convert that into so many vouchers and tell the parent, this is your voucher, you spend it in this school or that school. I think the control will shift. If it shifts to the parent and the child, then the teacher will attend school. The headmaster will run the place, because if they don't get money to pay the salary of the teacher, they will behave. Today the teacher looks up to the headmaster, and the headmaster is missing 25% of the time. In my village I've seen, and therefore 25% of the teachers are missing. The accountability is to the unknown bureaucracy which goes all the way up 100 levels, not to the beneficiary. So in fiscal reform, I'm also saying that if the government does spend so much per child, give that as a voucher to the child. Let someone run a school on the side and let the parent decide, because they're spending money in any case today. So the poor farmer is spending money to send the child to the school which is the teacher of the government school, who is making the money, and we are still spending money on the government school. So I think these three areas of reform, at start I'd say that since there's a lot of discussion going on reform, and how it will happen is a different issue, but if we do academic reform, financial reform and curricular reform or administrative reform, I think if we do things in this area along with putting the money up, a huge amount of energy will be released. The teachers are good, let me just say. The teachers down there, in fact, in most schools, are the most respected individuals. But the system is demotivating them when they're in the school. Their leaders are missing. So they go and do what the demand is, which is parents say, please teach my child and pay you money.
Sure, understand.
Can I just
yes,
ask
please,
Raji a
go ahead.
question? This last point, of teachers from government schools teaching in their homes and people willing to pay them, but not teaching as well in the school itself. One of the things that's puzzled me in the last number of years, that even in the expensive private schools in cities where children like yours and mine go, we observe the same thing, that the same teacher is taking tuitions at home and spending more time and energy at home. The parent is paying the private school fee, which is not controlled. So it's not a question of government saying you can't charge more, but the same thing happens there.